Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We're going to talk all things supply chain. Quick reminder, as I've said ad nauseum, we will be allowing for audience questions, so do keep that in mind. Let's jump right into the conversation. The term resilience gets thrown around quite a lot, often vaguely, often as this kind of corporate catch-all. So I'm going to start by level setting. How do each of you define resiliency? What does it actually mean for an operator? Brett.
Yeah, I guess I'll start off. Resilience to us, I think, are two things. Number one is having a pulse on the market, and then number two, making sure you do something with that pulse of the market. In our business, you heard the introduction, like ag is, we touch a lot of acres, we touch a lot of animals. And so right now, what's going on, particularly when it comes to labor, our labor shortage is about 22% down from the high of 2019. So having a pulse on labor, both from a shortage and then also from a skill set shift because of what's happening with data, is a big thing. The second thing is supply chain with resilience. And being a global company, about 70% of the crop inputs, particularly around crop protection products, come inside the US, either from China or India. About 80% of the potash comes in, and about 70% of the vitamins. So the tariff piece that comes in and understanding that side of it is another area that we continue to look at. And then farmer economics. I'm a fifth generation farmer also. I don't do the farm work, but I'm part owner in that particular piece, and I keep a pulse on that. And right now today, it's really difficult. We were just on a farm Thursday, Beth, our CEO, and myself, and the first thing we asked that farmer is, tell us a little bit about what's keeping you up at night. They've had 3 years of really tough sledding. Break evens, like for corn, per bushel is around $4.50. It costs about $4.50 to grow a bushel of corn. So right now you got economics, you got supply chain, but all that resilience usually creates opportunity.
Fifth generation farmer, what was your family's crop of choice?
Crop of choice was corn and soybeans.
Corn and soybeans.
Rotation, yeah.
Please.
So I mean, I think supply chain resilience in general really kind of hit the headlines during COVID more than any other time. And so we looked at what does that really mean when we talk about resilience, and kind of come at it from 3 different points. One is that shocks and crises basically create greater divergence within any industry. And so you really want to outperform your competitors because that shakes up the competitive dynamics. The second is that shocks and crises will happen in any sector or in any geography eventually. We all talked about it during COVID because it all kind of happened at once, but it's affecting any given industry on any given day, or an event will happen somewhere to, a small part of your operations that still matters. And then the third thing really is that when we looked at it and did some kind of research on how do companies perform and change for the better the competitive dynamics after a shock, they demonstrate resilience through absorbing that shock, so not being knocked off their performance trajectory as far as the competition, and then recovery. So how quickly do they bounce back to that prior trajectory? And the companies that win do those 2 things better. And supply chain has part of that.
Yeah, we're going to discuss that soon, delve a little deeper. But first I want to turn to you, Brett. At Land O'Lakes, how are you building resiliency into a supply chain that's deeply intertwined, as you already alluded to, with geopolitics, with climate risks? I mean, the list goes on.
Yeah, I think building the agility, we were at a session a little bit earlier today, and calm is contagious. Like it's the ever change that you talked about, that you have to build that muscle within your organization. But one thing that helped us, and I think helped us more so in COVID, that we're now bringing over into this environment right now, is we set up scenario rooms, some people call them war rooms, that allow us to look at how it's affecting 3 areas. And we've gotten really prescriptive and granular. How it's affecting us on price, how it's affecting us on supply, and how it's affecting us on capital. And so once we understand that, then we can go to the next level and we can talk about, is it going to affect the farmer? If so, how much? Is it going to affect the retailer? And is it going to affect our supplier or ourselves in that situation? This allows us to do what we would call scenario planning. It isn't 100%, and the reality is you're never going to get it 100% right, but it takes away some of the emotion by using data. One of the things that Land O'Lakes has done way before myself and the current management team is invested in data, proprietary data. Now with AI, we can take those stacks of proprietary data along with market data, whether the markets itself, the commodity prices, and you can do a lot more predictability in a lot shorter gap than what we could before, and I think that helps us. By far, don't have it all figured out, but we're making progress.
Yeah. Over to you, Dustin. I mean, you referenced that study, but you also work extensively with manufacturers across sectors. I'm curious what you're seeing in real time. What separates companies that can effectively withstand volatility versus those that kind of unravel, or as you refer to it, winners versus losers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think generally there are two categories of things the companies need to do well. The first is a whole set of things that most companies didn't really do that much until COVID, but I saw some hands go up earlier in the morning meeting about companies that have a war room. A lot of companies do now. So that's basically seeing what's on the horizon, doing scenario planning, shortcutting decision-making processes. But the other set is things that everybody always does in operations and supply chain, but doing them a little bit differently. So designing a supply chain network and taking resilience into account. Product design and making sure you don't have a single supplier spec'd in, because that drives resilience. Some of those things that you do all the time, but doing them a little bit differently. And I think companies that have really marbled resilience into those day-to-day decision-making factors are doing better.
Yeah. Let's talk AI. I want to kick off with you, Dustin, and then turn to you, Brett. Where are you seeing AI really move the needle in terms of creating these adaptive supply chain frameworks? Or where is it making a real material impact?
Yeah. In supply chain, most people who are doing that work, most of your workforce is doing some sort of planning. Yeah. So demand planning, supply planning, transportation planning, it doesn't really matter, but they are fundamentally mostly planners. They kind of look for signals and then they make decisions and they socialize those decisions and they go execute something. That typically takes historically takes a really long time. It involves a lot of spreadsheets and calls and ultimately making decisions off of imperfect data. Those people are scarce. The good ones are scarce. Really, with AI, I think we're just seeing greater fidelity in terms of forecasting. You're seeing predictive analytics. You're seeing now with Gen AI and agents, which have been a big topic here, things that are really recommending to planners that they do something, and eventually you might automate it. But all of that is giving time back to planners to think ahead and to make that supply chain more resilient rather than just kind of putting out fires day to day.
Thoughts?
Yeah, great comment. I would go back to the pain points in supply chain, and you all know this, but one in particular is missing a sale. Probably the worst, right? Number two is touching it more than once or twice. And number three is carrying it too long. And if you design your models around solving those three areas, you can move mountains. One of the things that we did is we went back and took the data from 2020, which was obviously COVID. I don't know about your industries, but our industry blowed it up. They took everything they could get. It was all about supply. And then 2021, a little bit more, and then 2022, we started destocking, which wasn't a lot of fun to explain to anybody in 2023. But we went back last year and said, if we loaded our data across the country and showed what we did in 2020, 2021, 2022, could have we predicted the 2023 destocking? And we got within like 2%.
Wow.
So, we didn't do it. We did it in arrears, but it gave us confidence to look forward and say, when you have that type of computing power and you have the data, use it. And it won't be 100% right, but it's really a no-regret move.
Yeah. As you increasingly leverage AI, especially in high volatility, high stakes scenarios, any risks that you're concerned about, any potential that you're trading, one vulnerability for another? Not particularly.
Yeah, I think obviously I think the thing with AI, and it came up a little bit, or I think hinted at in some of the conversations here on agents, is there's a difference between agents that are bringing a decision or a recommendation to somebody and agents that are then executing on something. So for example, changing an order quantity would be something that's actually executing, which usually you have a human in the loop. And I think we're still some distance from taking humans out of some of those loops when they impact a customer, when they could impact, food safety or something that's very critical. When it's something very transactional, I think we're quite close. So I think it's just making sure that we're really separating where are the places where you still need a human in the loop and where can you do without.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear from you. What's your litmus
that's
test?
a great answer.
What's your litmus test for when to keep it?
I would put the actions into three buckets, like the transactional, non-emotional, like accounts payable. I don't know how many bots that we use in that area right now, but it's not only improved the customer experience, it also has improved the accuracy from mistakes hugely from that standpoint. And then you have those actions in the middle that are a bit emotional, but the reality is you can start, like forecasting, I would say. Our supply chain people love what they do, and they're like, who's gonna tell me what to do better than I know this business? And then there are those ones, particularly around customer experience, that customer service that are very emotional. And I think you just kind of gotta work it, but you have to keeping that front and center. Because it's not going away. Like it's going to be there, and I think it's going to be the difference between those companies, along with the talent that actually use the AI that has the competitive advantage.
Yeah, key differentiator. Well, Brett, staying on you, and as we said in the introduction, Land O'Lake touches over half of U.S. farmland, which gives you a really rare data point advantage. How are you turning that data into predictive power, certainly for the business, but also for farmers?
Yeah, for farmers, it's either too wet, too cold, too dry,
right.
You name it. And what's happening is we've always had applied research in plots, but now with the technology, you can actually do applied research on their farm. And if you asked a farmer today, like, what is the most important data that you want to look at? Of course, the markets. What they really want to look at is benchmarking how they're doing versus others in their space that have similar fields, similar practices, similar budgets. That's never been done in ag, either in row crop or livestock. And so we've had a lot of applied research, but now we're bridging in to this area of on-farm data. And again, we're about 18 million acres that we've gathered. It's not robust enough to do that benchmarking, but we believe over the next 1, 2, 3 years, we can partner with other suppliers to help us in that area and have the scale.
Yeah. You've said, Dustin, that resilience isn't about stockpiling, it's about speed, it's about adaptability. For those in the audience just thinking about how, their supply chain leadership, what are the real markers then of supply chain agility? And certainly, how has that even just changed over the last 5, 10 years?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Brett, you're the second person I think on the stage today to talk about too much inventory. And that was a really comfortable thing, I think, to do. Again, let's go back to the COVID experience. People talked about going from just in time to just in case. Maybe that's okay in some instances, and yes, you need to revisit buffers all the time. But when the world is really unpredictable or things are changing fast, the odds that your extra inventory or excess capacity in a manufacturing line is going to be the right inventory or the right capacity is pretty low. And it's really painful not to have anything to sell. I think it's even more painful to have nothing to sell and a lot of stuff you can't sell. So generally, I think we need to think about supply chains as being fast and light rather than sort of big and heavy. So how can I compress the cycle of decision making? There's no particular reason why we have to do everything monthly. Like supply chains don't need to be synchronized with the moon. You can do things faster now, especially with AI. And where can I outsource where it's prudent? And then also, how do I look, I think, outwards and make sure I'm collaborating with customers, collaborating with suppliers, having open lines of communication. All of that, I think, for faster, lighter versus sort of slower and heavier for most supply chain design.
Anything to add?
Yeah, those change, to your point. Those supply chains, in a lot of cases, particularly around the agriculture products, are 18 and 24 months. You need to look around the corner. And there is no Circana, like I'm learning the food business every day. There is no market research in row crop or animal production like there is in the grocery business. So if you don't have that data or you don't partner with somebody, it's hard to model that particular piece, but there's hundreds of millions of dollars that can be efficiently moved towards innovation that today is not an efficient way to run a railroad or a supply chain. So it's so exciting when you think about that particular piece, and it's all pro-competitive because it's the right thing to do for everyone in the channel. We just didn't have the capability until now to do that.
Yeah. Pause here very quickly. Any questions from the audience? Raise your hand. Question over here, please. And can you state your name and company, please?
Rashmi Badave from TIAA. It's a financial services company. Question for both of you. We've talked a lot about geopolitical risks and its implications. You're doing scenario planning. What is the one external shock that keeps you up at night? What are you most worried about?
What has you sweating buckets?
You want to go?
You go.
All right.
You want me to go?
So, I mean, I think external shock, you know, like I said before, I think a lot of things are very industry specific or geographically specific. You know, I think in an event, if there were greater geopolitical conflict, I think in other parts of the world that are more central to supply chains, like in Asia, I think all the scenario planning in the world wouldn't do much for you in that instance, right? So that would just be a big economic impact. And I think, you know, like COVID, but a little bit different flavor.
It's a great answer. It's a great question. And when I think about talent, I think it's the biggest piece. Like the talent shortage and the talent willingness to adopt AI scares me. Because we have a gap between boomers and what I would call Generation X Z and millennials. I'm an X, and I have to force myself from a data standpoint. I'm not a data native. I love it, but the reality is there's a big group of population in that particular area that this workforce skill set, strategic workforce planning, I think is maybe a bigger deal than what we're all thinking. And just the cost of labor is real, right? And so how do you get the most out of the people that you have along with AI? I shouldn't say it keeps me up at night, but I know it's something we're a long ways away from having perfected. That's what I would say.
Well, piggybacking off of that, I mean, in agriculture, I'd argue nature is the ultimate variable. And so I'm curious just how you design for resilience, or if scenario planning is even probable when you work in a system that depends on biology, weather, a higher power. You know, just is it possible to really scenario plan on the independable?
It is, and I think then you got to decide what are the controllables
Sure.
and the uncontrollables, right? And you work through that. We talked a little bit about that from a talent standpoint. There's talent, and then there's engaged talent. And how do you get your talent engaged? And I think in this environment, having the commitment to them to make sure that you're co-developing a development plan with them, and that you are moving them through experiences to get them equipped to adjust or be agile in this environment, and just spend time with them. Yeah. I mean, we talked about this again this morning. Our job in this room is probably more about asking questions than it is about answering them, and helping that next generation and the current generation get the work done. So it's a task, but it's a fun one.
Certainly a fun. It keeps you on your toes. Very quickly with the remaining time we have, I mean, when you think about resiliency really embedded in an organization for these COOs, is it more about foresight? Is it more about flexibility?
I think it's more about flexibility in general. I would piggyback on the comment about talent, though. And there was one earlier, I think in the breakfast meeting, about data. Yeah. So the foresight, I think, to invest in those two things, so data and using that data for information, and then having good talent, which is much easier said than done. I think those two things, if you can do those and have the foresight to do it, will be no regrets. Beyond that, I think those two things will help you be flexible for the inevitable unforeseen events.
Yeah. Close us out.
Change management. If there's some way we could have a meter on our people to understand where they are in change management, that's a big deal. Existing and new recruits.
Yeah. Brett, Dustin, thank you for such a timely discussion.